I get frequently asked to do videos about the existence of God, refuting atheists and agnostics, discussing the ontological argument, discussing the transcendental argument for the existence of God, etc., etc. But I very rarely talk about these issues. The reason for this is simple. Everyone talks about this issue. Everyone is making videos refuting atheism. Everyone is talking about the existence of God. So I want to make videos that are unique. I want to make videos that not many people talk about. So I don't frequently do videos on the existence of God. But this is not to say that I've never done any videos on the existence of God. In the past, in various different clips and short videos, and even in courses, I've talked about the existence of God. But many of you have not seen these videos. So what I decided to do is I decided to make a compilation of 5 different videos on the existence of God, talking about everything from the traditional Thomistic refutation of Anselm's ontological argument from Cardinal Cajetan, to talking about the transcendental argument for the existence of God, to talking about why I really love the fourth way and think it is very important for St. Thomas's theology as a whole. If you want to watch more from me about the existence of God, you can go to my website at christianbwagner.com/courses. I have 2 courses in particular where I discuss the topic at length. First, my Summa Commentary, Existence of God, and then second, my complete course of Thomistic theology. In either of those cases, I discuss the question. So if you're interested, check out the link below. That's all that I have. Enjoy. Can Catholics use transcendental argument for God? I mean, if by that you simply mean you want to argue from the existence of certain contingent things, for example, logic and morality, to say that God must necessarily exist to uphold these things, then yeah, sure, you can use the transcendental argument for the existence of God. If you mean, can we exclusively rely on those, then no, that would be an error of the agnostics, which were condemned in the magisterium, I think, of Blessed Pius IX, and then also implicitly in Vatican I. You need to understand is that when Anselm was writing, Anselm was not writing the ontological argument for apologetics. He was writing it for devotional purposes. Now, how does that make sense? So Anselm is writing to people that already believe in the existence of God. They already know from the light of nature that God exists. Then they also, from the higher light of supernatural revelation, assent to the existence of God. They already know this. From that perspective, from the already knowing of God, and from some knowledge of divine simplicity, that his existence is really identical to his essence. From that knowledge, we are able to make such a reflection spiritually that God's essence is to be. That's Anselm's whole point. So if you're going in there to try to cherry pick some apologetical arguments to use against people, you're missing the point. The point for Anselm is that this is devotional theology. If you just blast past the argument and say, hey, this is something I should use against my atheist friend over there, or whatever, you completely miss the point. All of you out there, just try it. Just try to go to that section in Anselm's works and to meditate on the necessary certainty that we have in the existence of God from the fact that it's really identical to his essence. If there's any Latin cells out there, let me just show you guys something. A classic work on this is from Cardinal Cajetan's commentary on posterior analytics, chapter 3. So if you go into I think it's the 1583 set, it's on page 175 is where his commentary on chapter 3 starts. So if you want to read more about the ontological argument, that is your place to go right there. Okay, so ontological argument. Basically, this is the question of whether we can know God's. Okay, this is very. I'm trying to phrase this very carefully because this is actually a very significant point in the argument. Whether we can know that God exists per se nota quod nos. Okay, that may sound like a very strange way of phrasing a question, and you will notice that I explicitly did not say existence because that's going to be a big part of why the ontological argument fails. Okay, so what is this fancy stuff per se nota quod nos? Okay, so for something to be per se nota, it basically means we can put it like self-verifying. It's self-verifying. Self-verifying, it basically means that when we make a judgment, so let's say I said man is an animal. When I make a judgment, there is a containment of the subject in the predicate without any other medium of demonstration. What the heck does that mean? Basically, man. So let's expand this a little bit. What is man? Okay, man is a rational animal. So let's say I replaced man with rational animal is an animal. So if you change up the subject and the predicate to what it is formally equivalent to, then eventually you'll get a sort of identical subject and identical predicate. Whereas in a normal argument, in an argument that's not per se nota, let's say I wanted to prove that Socrates is mortal. Let's say that I want to prove that Socrates is mortal. And I would start out with Socrates is a man, all men are mortal. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. I have this right here. That's called the demonstrative medium, or this is the minor premise here. This is right here the medium through which I am demonstrating that Socrates is mortal. Because technically speaking, mortality is not something in the formal definition of man. Rather, it's something that's virtually contained. So you need a really a properly distinct minor premise in order to conclude this. So this is so that's what it means to be per se nota. So when we say that God exists, or rather we can put it into God is one who exists, we're asking the question of, for to us, is one who exists, is that contained in the premise, I mean, in the term God? Is that contained in it? So this is a weird question on the surface of things, because obviously God necessarily exists. So it seems like we should just say yes. And therefore, we should be able to say something like God, therefore God exists. Because contained in the idea of God is existence, right? So we should just be able to say God, therefore God exists. That seems like it would be a logical step. So the Thomists, we're not going to say that there's anything wrong actually with per se nota. That is, that there's somehow a containment of existence in the very definition of God. It's this part that's going to be troublesome for us, the quod nos part. So something can be per se nota in se, or rather quod se, and something can be per se nota quod nos. Something can be self-evident, I'll just say self-evident in itself, or self-evident according to us. So this quod se just means according to itself, and then this quod nos just means according to us. Basically, this would be the different question of this one asks whether it is contained in the definition of the subject, and this is asking whether it is contained in the definition of the subject as it is apprehended by us. This is very important, as it is apprehended by us. And this can take actually two forms, to all and then to the wise. It could be as it is apprehended by any individual versus as it is apprehended just to the wise, who are able to apprehend it. So, I mean, you get certain different views. To all, this would be, Scotus takes this position. I think Bonaventure takes this position. And then to the wise, I know Albert the Great takes this position. I think Alexander of Hales takes this position off the top of my head. Don't quote me on that. So yeah, there's a variety of opinion within this. So the question is, we already concede
I think everybody concedes, actually, it is contained in the definition of the subject, because, I mean, God necessarily exists. So this existence is actually contained in what it means to be God. We agree with it. But this is a question right here is, okay, well, is it contained in our apprehension of the sub? Is it contained in our apprehension of the thing? So we apprehend God. Do we apprehend that he's really identical to existence in the real? This is the issue right here. Is do we apprehend this? And the Thomists are going to say, well, we actually don't apprehend the quiddity of God. We don't apprehend the quiddity of God without discourse. So when we go on and we figure out that God is good, God is just, God is wise, and so on and so forth, this actually requires discourse. This requires reasoning from us. And I mean, if it requires discourse, requires reasoning, then it is not per se nota quod nos. It requires us to go through things. And therefore, it's not as Scotus, Bonaventure, and the rest conclude, and Anselm famously, but it is something that's only quod nos, per se nota quod se. It is not per se nota quod nos. Okay, so now there's the famous objection. So basically, this is the way that it goes. God is the most perfect being that can be thought of. So that's the major premise right there. Okay, now the minor premise. Okay, now the most perfect being that can be thought of must be thought of as existing. And then the conclusion right here is therefore God must be thought of as existing. God is the most perfect being that can be thought of. The most perfect being that can be thought of must be thought of as existing. Therefore, God must be thought of as existing. And this is the rejoinder that Anselm brings forward. This is, they'll stick by this argument. But what's important here is the way that I frame this, the way that I state it, because usually they'll state it: God is the most perfect being that can be thought of. The most perfect being that can be thought of must exist. Therefore, God must exist. Be thought of as existing and exist. These are two different things, actually. So be thought of as existing. This is said to be in signified act. And to exist is in exercised act. So this would be like, to be thought of as existing, this would be like having the attribute of existence in the form of a noun. And this would be exercising, that I can spell. Exercising in the form of a verb. There's a difference between existence and existing. Existence and existing. Okay, and that's very important. Because right here, we actually, in this argument, in the way that I stated without the parentheses, there's actually a subtle equivocation. So if you said God is the most perfect being that can be thought of, the most perfect being that can be thought of must be thought of as existing, therefore God must be thought of as existing, this is just basically proving that God has such and such an attribute, that he must be thought of as having such and such an attribute. That's perfectly fine. That would be like saying the running man has the attribute of one who runs. Perfectly fine. That doesn't mean there's any running men. It just means that this is what's being predicated of such and such a thing. So that's what signified act means. It's signified in our language, in our intellects. We grasp that this is a certain attribute of something. But this is merely a signified act. This doesn't get you outside of the realm of your brain. You're still in your mind right here, that God must be thought of as existing. So the subtle sort of equivocation that occurs in this objection is right here, is when we turn it into the way that Anselm speaks of it. God is the most perfect being that can be thought of. The most perfect being that can be thought of must exist. Therefore, God must exist. You have 4 terms in your argument right here. So you're going from being thought of right there and thought of right there to exist. That's not thought of. That goes outside of your brain. So you guys get what I'm saying? I'm sorry. Signified act and exercised act are pretty hard to explain. So basically, you have in the major premise and in the minor premise, or in the major premise right here, the thought of, you have signified act, and then with exist, you have exercised act. You're going to something that's existence as an attribute to existing as a verb. It's an equivocation that's occurring right there.
In just stating the argument, this is what he says. The first way is as follows: whatever is in motion is moved by another. Now it is clear to the sense that something is in motion, e.g. the sun, therefore it is in motion by something else moving it. Now that which moves it is either itself moved or not. If it is not moved, then the point is proved, and we must postulate an immovable mover, and this we call God. If, however, it be moved, it is moved by another mover. Either, therefore, we must proceed to infinity, or we must come to an immovable mover. But it is not possible to proceed to infinity. Therefore, it is necessary to postulate an immovable mover. And this is really the most evident argument for the existence of God. This is what St. Thomas says in the Summa. He's going to say this is the kind of the most evident, obvious. It's not the most profound, but it kind of gets the job done. And it's just a popular sort of bread and butter argument. But I just like the way he states it here, actually. And I made a little flow chart here. So if it helps you kind of visualize the argument, I found that to be helpful for me when I was writing my notes. I made a little written chart. So he's going to have two assumptions here when he starts this argument. And these are assumptions I think we can all agree upon. If somebody wants to disagree with one of the assumptions, we can talk about that. But the first assumption is going to be that things are in motion. And I want you to notice, and I wrote a little note down there. He explains this in the 10th paragraph. And then this is something that the Thomists explain a lot. But by motion, St. Thomas doesn't mean like how we think of sort of physical movement. Like this pen is in motion from here to there. No, he would include things like my thought, me going from not thinking something to thinking something. That would be a movement. So by movement, all he means is going from potency to act. So potentially something to actually something. So going from cold to hot would be a movement. And and I wrote a note there that if you're currently reading this, you are in motion. No matter what you're doing, even if you're thinking about what I'm doing it and not reading, you're just kind of like shutting your eyes and trying not to move at all. You're still in motion because all movement means is going from potency to act, because you're thinking about what I'm saying right now. So you right now are in movement. So things are in motion. This is something which is obvious, universal. To even question it is itself ceding the point that motion exists. So the second proposition that we're going to start out with is that things moved are moved by another. Things which are moved by another. Nothing moves itself. So this is why and I want also to note the second thing is that by moved, again, we mean going from potency to act. And this is why paragraph 10 is going to be so important, because Aristotle and Plato are going to have two different ways of describing motion. So Plato is going to say that God is in motion, where Aristotle is going to say that God is immobile. Now, the reason for this is because they have different definitions of motion. Plato is going to take motion in a broad sense, just as any sort of operation. And Aristotle is going to take it in its proper sense, that is moving from potency to act. So when we say that God is the unmoved mover, and when we say that God is immobile, we are basically saying that God is pure act. That's all we're saying. So this kind of stops the sort of Reddit tier response where it's like, well, if God moves, then he must be moved. Well, that's not what we say. We're saying that things in motion, that is things which are moved, that is things which are mobile. And we're saying that God is immobile. Okay, that all makes sense? Okay, good. So kind of going to the flow chart to look over at the broad argument sort of thing. The first thing he's going to say is that is basically the question, is the thing in motion moved by something which is moved or not moved? So we have, for example, I'll use corporeal motion just because it's easier to conceptualize. But remember, This works with motion of any sorts, including things like intellectual motion. So like this pen, boom, moves over here. This pen moves over here. It's movement of the pen. Now, what is moving this pen? Is it something which is itself moved, or is it something which is not moved? Now, if you say it's something which is not moved, then you have proved that with that agreement that there's something which is immobile, which puts everything else into motion. And therefore, we have already proven we need to prove, because that's where we're going to start when we draw forth all of the attributes of God. Something which is immobile, that is something which is immutable. Now, if you say it's something which is moved, you're going to have a moved mover moving this pen, which is true. It's just my arm. My arm's a moved mover moving this pen. Now, you can ask the question on there, is my arm, that moved mover, is that eventually moved by a first, or is it not eventually moved by a first? Because if my arm's a moved mover, we can ask the same question about my arm as we asked about the pen, and we can go on and on and on. So if we say that it is moved by a first, then we're going to agree with the unmoved mover. And therefore, we get what we get. And on the other hand, we can say that it's not. And there's no first who is immobile, yet putting others in motion. So in this, we're going to have an infinite regress in what's said to be a per se subordinated series, which I'll get into what a per se versus a per accident subordinated series is, because this is another one of those, like, unfortunately, a lot of Thomists are going to be a bit wrong about this, and they're going to describe the wrong type of series, which is going to run into some problems. So yeah, that is something else we're going to have to explain later, what the difference between a per accident and a per se subordinated series is. So it's going to be our contention that this is impossible, that to have a infinite regress in a per se subordinated series is impossible. So we're going to need to prove two things. First, we're going to need to prove that whatever's in motion is moved by another. And I think basically everybody, once I explain the terms, everybody's going to agree to this. And I don't think you're going to have many people that are going to disagree. Just because for most people, like, they're going to see inductively when they look around themselves, like, oh, everything in motion is just moved by another. We can ask what put that in motion. We're not having these like little sparks of unmoved movers around in the world, or really self movers in the world. And then second, we're going to have to prove that an infinite regress in a per se subordinated series is impossible, which is going to be the bit of a more difficult one. Usually when you put forth this argument, most people are going to try to bite the bullet and say that the infinite regress is possible. Although some people are going to try to posit some sort of so-called existential inertia to where esse or actus essendi is unparticipated, I guess is the best way. It's unparticipated, and it doesn't need to have an initial oomph into it, I guess is the best way of expressing that. But really, we're going through the basic argument right now, so that's all secondary. Okay, so the first assumption, he treats it with three proofs. He's going to treat both with three proofs, but I'm just going to grab one of them. And this is kind of just to get you to read it himself. Don't just like watch this video and then not read what I said. You're kind of wasting your time if you're doing that. So the first assumption, he's going to prove it in the 5th through the 10th paragraphs. And he's going to prove it with three proofs. The first one is going to be the most difficult. The second one is one by induction. And I found the third one to be the easiest to explain and grasp. So that's the one I'm going to use. So to be moved, we've already defined motion as going from potency to act by a mover. So going from potency to act by one that is in act. So that's just the definition of motion, going from potency to act. And then the minor premise is that potency and act cannot be attributed to the same thing in the same sense. This is just the law of non-contradiction. And therefore, we're going to have to conclude that the thing which is moved does not move itself. because it's going to both have to be in potency to motion and in act to that same motion to bring about the actuality of that motion. So it's gonna, if you're gonna try to posit, if you're gonna try to disagree with that assumption, then you're gonna fall into some trouble. I think the most interesting, if I were to like try to myself get out of this argument and impiously deny the existence of God, I would honestly try to just deny that motion exists. I think that would be the easiest way of going about it. But not to give atheists any sort of ammunition. But I think I think once you agree with motion, all you really need to do is express the argument clearly, and it will follow to anybody who's fixed on it. Okay, so the second assumption is going to be that an infinite regress in per se subordinated series is wrong or impossible. Really, I don't know why I said wrong. It's impossible. So as a beginning note, you have to know the distinction between a per se ordered series and a per accidents ordered series. So St. Thomas, he'll give the fun example of, let's say you have a man which is swinging a hammer to like on an anvil to make swords, and he breaks the hammer, gets another hammer, and keeps pounding. Breaks a hammer, gets another hammer, keeps pounding. Breaks the hammer, and then a per accidents ordered series is going to be the relationship between all those individual hammers going all the way back. Or another example, which this one might be a little bit clearer, but can also provide some issues, is the relationship between father and then son. That one as well as a per accidents ordered series, because technically, when it comes to the union of form and matter for the individual fetus, it's going to be something which is directly brought about by God. So, which I'm just explaining this difference to people that already agree with the existence of God by way of that. But if you don't agree with the existence of God, you can take the anvil one. So when it comes to a per se ordered series, it's kind of like the best way to express it is if you have like I don't know, my microphone. My microphone is dependent on its arm, which is dependent on being attached to my desk, which is dependent on the earth, which is dependent on the sun. So having this direct sort of dependence, that's a per se ordered series. So you see in this little chart right there that I put on the side, that's from Austin Woodbury. If you have like, for example, a man with a staff hitting a stone, the stone, or I guess a stone's being held up by the staff. So the stone is dependent on the staff, which is dependent on the hand, which is dependent on the arm, which is dependent on the nerves, which is dependent on the motor center, on the will, which is, since we believe in promotion, dependent on God. So that's the difference between a per se and a per accidents series. Per accidents series can go back and forward in time. And actually, it's St. Thomas's opinion that you can have an infinite regress in a per accidents ordered series. So like this sort of low tier argument that you'll get from some so-called Thomists, that it's going to be like, oh, well, if you have that guy created that thing and that thing, that thing and that thing and that thing going back in time, like you can't have an infinite series going back in time. Well, it's like, well, actually, St. Thomas kind of thinks that you can. So we're only talking about per se ordered series. So you have this sort of relationship of direct dependence rather than a sort of independent or possibly independent relationship, which can go back infinitely in time, according to St. Thomas. It's possible. So, so to prove this, that you cannot have this infinite regress in a per se subordinated series, I'm going to take St. Thomas's third proof, just like I did last time, although there are two previous ones. So In this per se subordinated series, each of the moved movers is an instrumental mover. So it's going to communicate movement. So, for example, we look at our little chart right there. The nerves is going to communicate something from the motor center and then to the arm. And it's directly dependent on what comes previously to it. Now, that which communicates movement has it from another. This is going to be pretty obvious. Thus, none of the instrumental movers have it of themselves. I'm just drawing forth the definition more clearly. Therefore, the entire series of movers which do not have movement, therefore, the entire series is of movers which do not have movement of themselves. Again, this is pretty obvious. If we're looking at this per se subordinated series, obviously not going back to prime cause or movement, that's God. We look at the staff, the hand, the arm, the nerves, the motor center, the will. All of these things are instrumental movers. Every single one of them do not have movement of themselves, but rather from something else. And we already proved in the last one, in the first assumption, that none of these things can move themselves. That's what we already proved in the first assumption. So we've already X'd out that option to just say, well, I think the will just moves itself, and then it leads to the motor center, the nerves, the arm, the hand, the staff. Well, you've already agreed that the will, from the first assumption, that the will doesn't move itself. So none of these things are going to have movement of themselves. And then the final premise is going to be that the multiplication of those who lack movement of themselves will not result in one which does. So no matter how many of these instrumental causes you stack up, you're not going to eventually result in one which all of a sudden has it of himself. And the illustration for this, my favorite one is actually from Lagrange. He says, like, an infinite number of idiots does not make one genius. Because what's that supposed to? That's supposed to illustrate that an infinite number of things which don't have something can all of a sudden, just because you keep multiplying it, have it. And I think a better example would be like an infinite number of empty glasses does not give you water. You need a full glass to get water. So if you had, I guess we could, like one of those cascading water things. I think I can make this illustration work as a per se subordinated series. You have your infinite little thing of water glasses, where you ever see those where it's like kind of like the champagne tray thingies where it goes down. If you have an infinite number of those communicating the water down glass by glass by glass, and you're saying each one of these glasses does not have water of itself. If you're going to posit water, you're eventually going to have to posit one which is going to have water of itself to be able to communicate down the stream, if you get what I'm saying. And then I give another image right here. It's like if you had an infinitely long stream, and then you have no spring which feeds the stream as its source. You can keep stretching out the stream as long as you want, but if you don't have a source which has the water of itself and able to start the stream, you're not going to be able to get water. So that's what a per se subordinated series is, and it can't have an infinite regress. And then Sylvester Ferrara, he has a good quote, which I think kind of sums up exactly what I was saying. He says, if there are several movers and things moved in which there is no unmoved first, the whole multitude of movers will function as one mover of the moved. However, this is impossible, because then something would be moved and not moved by anything. For that multitude would not be moved initially by itself, as nothing moves itself primarily, as we already proved in the first assumption. It is not because one part that is not moved moves the other part, as no unmoved mover is posited there. Nor is it because one moved part moves another, as the aggregate composed of them has the nature of the moved, and thus needs something else by which it is moved. This is going to be the video that goes along with my Summa commentary on the existence of God, along with the fourth way. Usually it will not be like this, but the fourth way is just so special. I spent days trying to figure out the fourth way and just meditating on it constantly. And I think it's the most important of the ways. I think it forms the foundation for the rest of De Deo Uno, which is St. Thomas's consideration of the essence and the attributes of God. So I just wanted to, as this is the most important one, wanted to share it. And also, if you like this sort of thing, definitely consider signing up for the course. So I begin. So if you remember any of these proofs, let it be the fourth. It is not the most evident as the first, or popular in the common mind as the fifth, but is a rich compendium of mystic contemplation and the foundation for much of St. Thomas's theology on natural intelligence, beatitude, creation, law, and forms the foundation for deducing the remainder of the attributes of God. I cannot stress enough how important the fourth way is, yet its importance is matched by its difficulty. First, the difficulty that is found in the statement of the argument by St. Thomas. Sadly, he is short and does not elaborate on the process of reasoning or many of the terms of the argument. Why does he do this? I have no idea. Second, the difficulty that is intrinsic in the argument itself. While we can imagine becoming being and contingency with relative ease, to contemplate participation and transcendental perfections are quite difficult. Therefore, there will be no video for this way. I'll focus all my energy on writing an adequate article on this question, although I will record an audio version of this article for those interested. And this is the audio version. Lastly, it is important to remember that the fourth way is not something to be mastered, but something to be mastered by. We are to be, as Plato, caught up in the fiery desire to see the beauty in which all these various beautiful things participate in. We must therefore say with St. Augustine, quote, I answered unto all these things which stand about the door of my flesh. Ye have told me concerning my God, that ye are not he. Tell me something about him. And with a loud voice they exclaimed, He made us. My questioning was my observing of them, and their beauty was their reply. So first, the definition of terms. In order to understand the argument, we must understand something about perfection. There are two types of perfection in this world. First, there are mixed perfections. In their notion, they imply some sort of limitation or insufficiency. Let us think, for example, of the concept man. There is a certain limit found in the notion of a rational animal. To prove this, we must only try to think of the concept of an infinite man, that is, a man without any limitation to his entity, but having the fullness of being. This is impossible, for a man exists in the determination of this flesh and this bone. He cannot possess fullness, but by the very concept is limited. There are other perfections, i.e. pure perfections, that do not have this same limit. There is nothing incoherent about thinking of infinite truth, infinite beauty, infinite being, infinite intelligence, infinite love, etc. These concepts are able to be abstracted from matter, where the former are stuck in material and individual limitation. These pure perfections coincide in some way with being as such. St. Thomas summarizes in De Veritate, question 1, article 1, quote, some are said to add to being because the mode they express is one that is common and consequent upon every being, i.e. transcendental. This mode can be taken in two ways. First, insofar as it follows upon every being considered absolutely. Second, insofar as it follows upon every being considered in relation to another. In the first, there is a negative consequent upon every being considered absolutely. Its undividedness, a unity or oneness. If the mode of being is taken the second way, we find a twofold use. The first is based on the distinction of one being from another, and this distinctness is expressed by the word something. The second division is based on the correspondence of one being has with another. This is possible only if there is something which is such that it agrees with every being. Such a being is the soul. The soul, however, has both knowing and aptative powers. Good expresses the correspondence of being to the appetitive power, true expresses the correspondence of being to the knowing power. Thus far, we have being, unity, truth, and goodness as these pure perfections. Further, we can think of beauty as a certain combination of truth and goodness, and then we can think of intellect and will as correlative with being and thus also pure perfections, which brings with it the perfections of these faculties, such as love, wisdom, justice, and the like. The argument. After the above considerations, we begin our argument for the existence of God from a consideration of those pure perfections in creatures. For ease of use, let us consider one of these pure perfections, beauty. This is the classic example used by Plato and St. Augustine. We gaze around ourselves and we see many beautiful things. All things in some degree or another reflect some aspect of beauty. One may look at his wife and see her beauty, or the mountains and see beauty, or some beautiful painting, or read some beautiful book, or listen to some beautiful piece. Beauty pervades all things in sundry degrees and with different foundations, from rocks to butterflies, on the basis of sound or taste or touch. Even ideas or actions can be said to be beautiful. This beauty of various things, or goodness, or truth, etc., is a precept of common sense. All in devout honesty must concede that there are things throughout the world that are true, good, beautiful, noble, and the like. It is from this basis of beautiful things that the fourth way brings our intellects up to contemplate beauty itself, which is God. Yet we consider these beautiful things and see that they are not beauty itself. They are limited in their beauty, variable in their beauty, sometimes more beautiful, sometimes less beautiful. We look to other things and see that there are other things that are more beautiful than the present objects of our contemplation. Yet, as we saw above, beauty is a pure perfection. There is no limitation in the concept of beauty, for perfection is not the reason for limitation. From whence does this limitation come? It cannot come from beauty, for the same cannot be the reason for opposites. And imperfection, limitation, and perfection, beauty, are opposites. This limitation must come from the limitation of the subject in which it adheres. The beauty of an ant is less than the beauty of a flower, not from the defect of the notion of beauty, but from the greater limitation of the ant. Therefore, we arrive at a real distinction between the essence of the thing contemplated and the beauty inherent in that thing. The beautiful thing is a compound between perfection and something which is perfected. Since this beautiful thing is a compound, we arrive at the conclusion that the connection between the thing and its beauty is caused by another, for diverse things are not united according to themselves. Further, the reason for perfection is not found in the nature of the thing, for the reason for limitation is found in the nature of the thing, and the same thing is not the reason for opposites. Thus, the reason for perfection must be found in another, which unites the perfection to the thing. Thus, it is said to have perfection, not in an essential manner, but in a participated manner. Yet, yet this cause, that is, the uniter of the perfection and the thing, cannot lack what it gives, for the effect preexists in the cause. For that which is caused in the thing comes to exist in that thing when before it was not. Now, that thing to which the perfection is caused is not the cause of its own perfection in relation to that thing which is caused in it, else something would preexist in its effect, but it exists in absurdity. Thus, the effect must preexist in the cause actually, and in the effect only potentially. Therefore, we can conclude that the beautiful thing is caused ultimately by something which has the perfection of beauty. Further, we can demonstrate that this essential beauty that causes the unity between the perfection and the thing is ultimately uncaused. For without a reason for something's existence, it does not exist, i.e., the principle of sufficient reason. Now, that which is caused, in relation to the aspect wherein it is caused, does not have the reason for its existence in itself, but in that which causes it to be. Therefore, the reason for the sufficient reason for the existence of a cause thing is found in its cause, not in itself. Now, if the cause of the thing is also caused, its sufficient reason for existence will be found in its cause, not in itself.
Now, no matter how many causes we multiply this process in, there will not be an inherent sufficient reason for existence found in a caused cause. Therefore, we must return back to an uncaused cause. Now, we have already stated that the perfection of the effect must preexist in the cause. Therefore, the uncaused cause of beautiful things will itself be beautiful. We can further demonstrate that this beauty will be in an essential manner. For we have already established that any compound of essence and beauty, such as found in the beautiful things around us, is a caused compound. Now it is a contradiction that something both be caused and uncaused. Therefore, the beauty of this uncaused beauty must not be a compound of essence and beauty that is participated, but must be essentially beautiful, i.e., beauty itself. Further, this essential beauty must be infinite beauty. For as we have established above, 1. Perfection is not the reason for its own limitation, and 2. Beauty is a pure perfection. Therefore, from a consideration of any limited beauty, we must raise our minds to infinite beauty itself. Now, if we remember back to our original discussion of the Transcendentals, there is a real identity between them, for they are only relations of being. For example, truth is being as related to the intellect. Therefore, we can come to three conclusions considering infinite beauty itself. First, it will also be all of the other transcendentals and corollaries, goodness, unity, truth, intelligence, justice, etc., due to this real identity. Second, it will have its being essentially and thus necessarily. For if it has that which is really identical to being essentially, it will have being essentially, as was already applied in the first conclusion. Now we cannot separate something from itself, i.e., being from being. Therefore, the existence of this being will be necessary. Third, it will be the cause of all perfections, both extensively, i.e., of every transcendental, and intensively, of every iteration of every transcendental. Since 1, we may reason as we have above for any other transcendental perfection to the essential and infinite perfection, and 2, all of the essential and infinite perfections are really identical in the same being as concluded in the first conclusion. Thus, that which is infinite beauty itself must also be infinite being itself, infinite goodness itself, and so on for every pure perfection. Further, that which is infinite beauty, causing all beautiful things, is the cause of all entity, reality, unity, truth, goodness, and beauty in all things that are limitedly being real, one, true, good, and beautiful, and is such that all other things that are being real, one, true, good, or beautiful are so to what extent they participate in entity, reality, unity, truth, goodness, and beauty from him. Now that being which has every perfection is purity and infinite, and now that being which has every perfection in purity and infinity is God. Therefore, it has been demonstrated. Now, Plato's error. We have followed the argument laid out by Plato throughout his dialogues, but why do we not follow him into all his conclusions? Plato used this method of reasoning to conclude that not only the transcendentals, but all things have a typical existence, each thing in this world merely participating in the typical form. Just as God is beauty itself, in which all beautiful things participate in, Plato would argue that there is something which is cupness, in which all cups participate in. Plato has a good intuition here, yet he fails to distinguish between pure and mixed perfections. Cupness is a certain mixed perfection, giving way to imperfection in our notion of it, not only in the manner in which it exists, as do the pure perfections. So the same line of argumentation does not follow. The union of the form of cup with a particular matter does not require something that is subsisting cupness. Yet we ought not to forget that, while the notion is a mixed perfection, it is still a mixed perfection. Thus, we still must ascend the ladder of perfection. The perfection present in cupness is something that must ultimately be due to subsistent perfection, following in much the same line of argumentation that we have laid out above. Yet this ultimate perfection that pre-exists in the uncaused cause is of a different relation to the mixed perfection of cupness than it is of the pure perfection of beauty. With the pure perfection, we can say that it formally and eminently exists in God, affirming the notion, removing the limitation of present material instantiations of beauty. On the other hand, with the mixed perfection, we cannot say that it formally exists in God. In that case, we would be blasphemously saying that a notion mixed with imperfection exists in God. Yet we can say, yet we still have to account for the perfection in the mixed perfection. Thus, we first deny the imperfections due to the notion, and second, elevate the remaining perfection after stripping the imperfection of the notion to the level of God. In this, we say that cupness exists not formally, but virtually in God. Although it is more accurate to descend from God to creature, under this lens, there exists the perfection of cupness in God. Then, in creating cups, this perfection is limited by the material confines of cups and certain imperfections mixing with the notion itself. We must be careful in sacred theology to judge all things in relation to God, not to judge God in relation to things. Applications of the argument. St. Thomas provides quite a few applications to this argument, everything from natural law to beatitude to creation. But for brevity's sake, I will only highlight one. The others can be read in Garrigue's application of the fourth way in God, his existence, and his nature, i.e., the perfection of intellect from Summa Theologiae Prima Pars, question 79, article 3. St. Thomas writes, the active intellect of which the philosopher speaks is something in the soul. In order to make this evident, we must observe that above the intellectual soul of man, we must needs suppose a superior intellect, from which the soul acquires the power of understanding. For what is such by participation, and what is mobile, and what is imperfect, always requires the pre-existence of something essentially such, immovable, and perfect. Now, the human soul is called intellectual by reason of a participation in intellectual power, a sign of which is that it is not wholly intellectual, but only in part. Moreover, it reaches to the understanding of truth by arguing, with a certain amount of reasoning and movement. Again, it has an imperfect understanding, both because it does not always understand everything, and because in those things which it does understand, it passes from potentiality to act. Therefore, there must need to be some higher intellectual, by which the soul is helped to understand. We must say that in the soul is some power derived from a higher intellect, whereby it is able to light up the phantasms. The separate intellect, according to the teaching of our faith, is God himself, who is the soul's creator and only beatitude. Wherefore the human soul derives its intellectual light from him. According to Psalm 4:7, the light of thy countenance, O Lord, is signed upon us.